Her abusive husband abandoned her at the hospital. Mafia boss found her and made him pay. She hadn't moved in 3 hours. Face swollen shut, 3 cracked ribs, ligature marks on both wrists. The chart said, fall downstairs. The bruises said something else. Ezrin Khalil stood beside her bed, close enough to read the damage her husband had left behind. The nurse asked for an emergency contact. The woman whispered, "There's no one." Ezrin looked down at her. He hadn't heard those words in 23 years. Not since his mother said them in a bed just like this one, the night she died alone. He pulled the chair closer and sat down. Senna Murray was abandoned by the man who swore to protect her, left bleeding in a hospital bed with no name on the emergency line. And the man sitting beside her now owns Detroit from the shadows. Subscribe and hit that bell, because what happens next will shake you to the bone. Colton Fairgate drove his wife to Detroit Mercy General at 3 a.m. He carried her through the sliding doors, set her in a wheelchair, told the intake nurse she fell down the basement stairs, and left. Didn't sign her in, didn't leave a number, didn't look back. Just walked to his car and drove home like he'd dropped off dry cleaning. Senna was 25 years old. Before Colton, she'd been a kindergarten teacher at a public school on Detroit's east side, the kind of teacher who memorized every student's birthday and kept extra snacks in her desk for the kids who came to school hungry. She was warm and patient, and the children loved her because she saw them. Every single one. Colton Fairgate took that from her. He was 39. A prominent real estate developer with magazine covers and a handshake that opened doors across the city. He sat on the board of a children's hospital. He donated to literacy programs. The local press called him a visionary. What the press didn't see was what happened behind the front door of the house he'd moved Senna into. 30 minutes outside the city, no neighbors close enough to hear anything, no friends allowed to visit. A year into the marriage, Colton called Senna's school principal and told him she was struggling with severe anxiety and needed to step back from teaching. Senna didn't know about the call until she showed up for work and found her position had been filled. When she confronted Colton, he held her face in one hand, gently, the way you'd hold something you were about to break, and told her she wasn't well enough to work, that he'd take care of everything, that she should rest. The rest became a cage. He canceled her phone and gave her a new one he monitored. He closed her bank account and moved everything into his name. He intercepted calls from her younger sister Darcy in Ohio until Darcy stopped trying. He told Senna's few remaining friends that she was dealing with a private health issue and needed space. One by one, every thread connecting Senna to the outside world was cut with surgical precision, until there was nothing left but Colton and the silence he controlled. The beatings followed a logic. Never the face before a public event. Never the hands where someone might see. He hit where clothes covered. He kept the damage invisible because invisible damage doesn't generate questions. But that night, the night he drove her to the hospital, he'd lost control. A plate left on the counter. That was the trigger. A single plate. And something in Colton snapped past the usual calibration. The cheekbone, the ribs, the wrists where he pinned her to the floor. He went further than he'd ever gone, and when Senna stopped breathing for 9 seconds on the kitchen tile, he calculated the risk. Dead wives attract investigations. So he drove her to the hospital, delivered his lie, and left her there like a problem he'd deal with later. Ezrin Khalil was never supposed to be in that corridor. He was at Detroit Mercy General because his lieutenant, Rook, had taken a knife wound during a port territory dispute earlier that evening. Rook was stable. The situation was handled. Ezrin was walking toward the exit when he passed the open door of a room and stopped. A woman alone in a hospital bed, face so swollen her eyes were nearly sealed shut, wrists wrapped in gauze, a nurse standing beside her with a clipboard, asking questions that weren't getting answers. "Is there someone we can call? A family member? A friend?" The woman's voice came out like it had been crushed under something heavy. "There's no one." Ezrin stood in the doorway. The fluorescent light hummed above him. The hallway smelled like bleach and coffee and the particular sadness that lives in hospitals after midnight. He was 37 years old, and he ran Detroit's underground with a stillness that made powerful men leave rooms. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. His silence carried more consequence than other men's violence. He had killed, and he had ordered killing, and he had done things that would keep a priest awake for the rest of his natural life. But those two words, "there's no one," cracked something open that 20 years of control hadn't managed to seal. He was 14 the last time he heard them. His mother, Nadira, lying in a hospital bed with a broken jaw and internal bleeding. His father had beaten her for the last time, though none of them knew it was the last time until her heart stopped at 4:17 a.m. The nurse had asked the same question. Emergency contact. Nadira had given the same answer. There's no one. Because the man who was supposed to be her someone was drunk in the parking lot, and her 14-year-old son sitting beside her bed didn't count on a hospital form. Ezrin sat with his mother's body for 2 hours before anyone came. He stepped into Senna's room. He didn't speak to her. He found the attending nurse and paid for Senna's treatment in full. Cash, no name, no record. Then he pulled the chair beside the bed and sat down. Not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to disappear. Just present. Senna opened her one functional eye and looked at him. Who are you? Nobody you need to be afraid of. That's what they all say. I know, so don't believe me. Just rest. She watched him for a long time, this stranger in an expensive coat sitting beside her bed at 4 a.m. with no explanation and no demand. He didn't check his phone. He didn't speak. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes steady, like he had nowhere else in the world to be. Senna closed her eye. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone. But the chair didn't scrape backward. The footsteps didn't retreat. The presence beside her stayed, warm and still and asking nothing. And somewhere between the beeping of the heart monitor and the gray light of a Detroit dawn creeping through the blinds, Senna Murray fell asleep without clenching her fists for the first time in 2 years. When she woke, the chair was empty. A cup of water sat on the bedside table. Beside it, a handwritten note on hospital letterhead in sharp, unhurried script. The door is open. It stays open. She held that note against her chest and stared at the ceiling, and something so small she almost missed it shifted behind her ribs. Not hope. Not yet. But the space where hope might fit if she ever let it back in. Senna stayed in the hospital for 3 more days. Colton called twice. The first time, he told the front desk he was her husband and asked about her condition with the warmth of a man who genuinely cared. The second time, he left a voicemail for the nursing staff explaining that his wife had a history of anxiety and clumsiness and that he'd be collecting her soon. The narrative was already being built. Concerned husband, fragile wife. A story so neat it could slide into any police report without a wrinkle. On the third morning, a man the size of a refrigerator appeared in her doorway. Broad, scarred, silent. He said one word. Win. Then he handed her a phone. One number programmed in it. She pressed call. Ezrin's voice was low and unhurried. Your husband filed a missing persons report this morning. He's playing the worried spouse on every local channel. If you walk out the front door, his version of you is the only one anyone will see. Senna's chest tightened. So I'm trapped. No, you have a choice. I have a place. No public record, no digital trace. The door locks from the inside and you hold the only key. Not me. 40 minutes later, Wynn drove her to a restored Victorian in Detroit's Corktown neighborhood. It was quiet, clean, warm. Nothing like a cage. Nothing like home either. Just a space that didn't hurt to exist in. The first thing Senna did was test the bedroom door. She locked it. Unlocked it. Locked it again. Stood in the frame with her hand on the knob, breathing. The lock was hers. The choice was hers. She left it unlocked and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms against her eyes until the shaking stopped. Ezrin arrived that evening. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and opened a folder thick enough to stop a door. "I've been looking into your husband for months," he said. "Not because of you, because buildings in my territory keep burning." He laid it out. Over the past 3 years, Colton Fairgate had purchased 11 distressed residential properties in low-income Detroit neighborhoods. Each one was insured heavily. Each one burned within months of purchase. The fires were ruled accidental. Colton collected $2.7 million per claim on average. But the buildings weren't always empty when they burned. 3 people had died. A young couple in Brightmoor who'd been squatting in one of the buildings because shelters were full. And a 60-year-old woman named Ruth Adair, a grandmother and church volunteer who'd been sheltering in a Corktown property after being evicted from her apartment. Ruth had survived 60 years in Detroit. She didn't survive Colton Fairgate's greed. "Every property deed," Ezrin said, sliding a document toward her. "Every insurance application, every claim, is filed under a trust in your name." Senna read the page. Her name, her signature, forged, but convincing. If the fraud ever unraveled, she'd be the one in handcuffs. Colton would walk away clean. He hadn't just married her to own her, he'd married her to wear her like a mask. Senna sat very still. The old version of her, the one Colton had spent 2 years building, the fragile, anxious, helpless woman who couldn't be trusted with her own phone, would have crumbled. But the woman sitting at that table wasn't the woman Colton had made. She was the woman who'd existed before him. The teacher who called child services when she saw bruises on a 5-year-old's arms. The woman who fought systems because small people deserved someone who'd fight. That woman wasn't dead. She'd been buried alive, and she was digging herself out. "What else?" Senna said. Ezrin studied her. Then he pushed the rest of the folder across the table. They worked through the night. Ezrin sat across from her reading while she went through the documents page by page. He didn't hover. He didn't explain things she could figure out herself. At midnight, he set a cup of tea beside her without being asked. She looked up. He was already back in his chair. She wrapped her hands around the mug and something loosened behind her sternum, a knot she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. She fell asleep at the table near dawn. When she woke, a blanket was draped across her shoulders. Ezrin was gone. Wynn was in the hallway, quiet as concrete. The second night, Senna woke at 2 a.m. screaming. The nightmare was always the same. Colton standing over her, the door sealed, no air, no way out. She threw the bedroom door open, gasping, and found Ezrin sitting in a chair in the hallway. Not inside the room, outside. A book open in his lap. He looked up. "Bad dream?" She nodded, still shaking. "Door's open," he said. "It stays open." He went back to reading. Senna stood in the doorway for a long moment, her heartbeat slowing, the panic draining like water from a cracked glass. She went back to bed. She slept through until morning. It was the first unbroken night in 2 years. The next evening, Colton appeared on the local news. A groundbreaking ceremony for a new affordable housing project. Golden shovel in hand, mayor beside him. That warm, practiced smile beaming into every living room in Detroit. The anchor called him a champion of the city's most vulnerable communities. Senna watched from the safe house couch. She didn't flinch. Something crystallized inside her. Not broke, crystallized. Like a lens snapping into focus. The man on that screen built his fortune by burning homes with people inside them. He wasn't a champion. He was a performance with nothing underneath. She wasn't the broken one. He was. He'd always been. She went back to the documents, went deeper, and the floor dropped out. Colton wasn't working alone. His partner was Alderman Tynes, a city housing official who fast-tracked condemned property designations so Colton could buy them for pennies. Tynes buried fire investigation reports. He suppressed evidence. But there was a witness they couldn't erase. A 13-year-old boy named Marcus who lived next door to one of the burned buildings. Marcus saw men pour accelerant through the basement windows. He told the police. The report vanished within 48 hours. Marcus and his mother were evicted 2 weeks later through a code violation Tynes manufactured. The boy was still out there. His testimony was devastating. And Colton had spent a year making sure no one heard it. Senna closed the folder. She stood up and walked into the room where Ezrin was reviewing port schedules. She set the documents on his desk. "Ruth Adair," she said, 60 years old, survived everything Detroit threw at her, died in a fire set by a man who never knew her name and collected millions for it. Her voice cracked. Then it broke open. Everything she'd held inside for 2 years came pouring out. The beatings, the isolation, the locked doors, the way Colton had whispered her into believing she was nothing until she almost became it. She didn't scream. She spoke, and every word landed like something that had been caged too long, finally hitting open air. Ezrin didn't move. He listened. When she finished, raw-voiced and trembling, he said, "Good. You have a voice. Use it." Senna wiped her face, her jaw set. "I don't want him dead. Dead is easy. Dead means it stops. I want him to watch everything he built turn to ash while he's still breathing. I want him to sit in a cell and know that the woman he left on a hospital bed is the one who put him there." The Detroit Urban Development Gala was 3 weeks out. Colton Fairgate was receiving the Rising Pioneer Award at the Detroit Institute of Arts for what the program called Visionary Community Revitalization. The governor would attend. 400 guests, full press coverage, live streamed across Michigan. The biggest stage in the city, built to celebrate a man who burned homes for profit and left people inside them. Senna intended to use every camera in that room. Ezrin laid out the logistics. His tech specialist, Lorna, sharp-tongued, fast-fingered, zero patience for small talk, held a catering contract with the venue through one of Ezrin's legitimate business fronts. She'd have access to the AV system 2 hours before the event. The presentation screens flanking the stage would be hijacked mid-ceremony during Colton's acceptance speech. 4 seconds to switch the feed. By the time anyone in the control booth reacted, the screens would belong to Senna. "One shot," Lorna said. "If anything looks doctored, they call it a hack, and Colton walks away a victim. The evidence has to be bulletproof." "It will be," Senna said. She spent the next 2 weeks building the package, with the steady hands of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Property deeds showing 11 buildings purchased through the trust in her name, signatures forged, as forensic handwriting analysis confirmed. Insurance claims totaling tens of millions. Fire department photographs of every burned building. Ruth Adair's death certificate beside a church photo of her smiling in a blue dress. The suppressed arson investigation reports Tynes had buried. Financial transfers connecting Colton to every transaction. Then she found the last piece. The one that turned a fraud case into something that would make the room stop breathing. 2 life insurance policies, both on Senna, totaling $3 million. The beneficiary wasn't Colton. It was a shell trust he controlled. The policies had been taken out 6 months ago. Ezrin's team pulled Colton's laptop history and found searches for blunt force trauma survivability thresholds, domestic fall fatality statistics, and accidental death investigation timelines. Senna sat back from the screen and let the picture assemble itself. The escalating violence wasn't rage, it was math. Each beating carefully calibrated, never enough to kill, always enough to leave a record. Hospital visits documented as falls and accidents, building a paper trail of a clumsy, fragile woman whose eventual death would surprise no one. The night he drove her to the hospital and left wasn't abandonment, it was a test. How much damage could she absorb and still survive? When she didn't die, the timeline moved up. The next beating was meant to be the last. She added the insurance policies and browser history to the evidence package. Her hands didn't shake. Ezrin's people located Marcus and his mother in a shelter on Detroit's east side, displaced by the manufactured eviction Tynes had arranged to silence them. Senna visited personally. She didn't send a lawyer. She didn't send Ezrin. She went herself, sat on the floor of the shelter's common room, and listened to a 13-year-old boy describe the night his neighbor's building burned. The men he saw through his bedroom window, the liquid splashing against the basement glass, the sound the fire made when it caught, a low whoosh, then a roar that shook the walls. The way his mother grabbed him and ran. Senna listened the way she used to listen to her students, fully, without interruption, without judgment. When Marcus finished, she asked him one question. "Would you say that again on camera so the people who did this can't pretend it didn't happen?" Marcus looked at his mother. His mother looked at Senna. Then Marcus nodded. They recorded his testimony that afternoon. Steady voice, clear eyes, devastating. Meanwhile, Colton wasn't idle. He'd escalated the missing persons campaign, another tearful press conference, a candlelight vigil he organized himself, a public reward that made the evening news. Alderman Tynes pushed surprise building inspections on 3 of Ezrin's Corktown properties, a thinly veiled threat. The window was narrowing. Every day Senna stayed hidden was a day Colton's public sympathy grew stronger. The night before the gala, Senna stood in the backyard of the safe house, looking at the Detroit skyline. Orange light bled across the river. The city hummed the way it always did, restless, alive, indifferent to the wars fought inside its houses. Ezrin found her there. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without touching. "Afraid?" he asked. "Not of him. Of after." She paused. "I've been surviving so long I don't know what comes next. I don't know who I am without the fear." Ezrin was quiet for a while. Then he spoke in that low, unhurried way of his, like each word had been weighed before it was released. "My mother worked 2 jobs. Cleaned offices at night, sorted mail during the day, never complained. My father drank everything she earned and beat her for the pennies he couldn't find." He paused. "She died in a hospital bed with no one listed as her emergency contact. I was 14. I sat beside her for 2 hours before a nurse found me." His jaw tightened. "I built everything I have because I was powerless in that hallway. I swore I'd never stand outside a door again and have nothing to offer the person on the other side." Senna reached over and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers. They stood like that until the sky went fully dark and the city lights replaced the stars. Morning of the gala. Senna dressed in silence. The gown was deep black, not decoration, armor. It covered every scar and fit the woman she was becoming. Lorna wired a small earpiece behind her left ear, tested it twice. Senna walked downstairs. Ezrin waited at the bottom, dark suit, no tie. When he saw her, he went still. He didn't compliment her. He looked at her the way a man looks at the most dangerous thing in the room. She almost smiled. The Detroit Institute of Arts. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, champagne, string quartet. 400 guests circulating with calculated elegance. Cameras lined the press riser. Senna entered on Ezrin's arm. The whispers started immediately. People recognized him. People recognized her. The missing wife from every newscast. She was supposed to be fragile, broken, hiding. Instead, she walked through that room like the ground beneath it already belonged to her. Colton saw her from across the hall. His champagne glass froze midair. Color drained from his face in stages. He crossed the room. Mask locked on. "Senna, sweetheart, thank God you're safe. I've been worried." Ezrin shifted his weight. Subtle. Final. Colton's reaching hand stopped dead. Senna looked him in the eye. "You left me in a hospital bed to die. Tonight, every person in this room is going to see exactly what you are." The lights dimmed. Colton was called to the stage. He climbed the steps and stood behind the podium, composure reassembled by sheer force of habit. The screens behind him lit up with development photos and smiling community members. Mid-sentence, the screens went black. A beat of static. Then they came back, and the content had changed. Property deeds, insurance claims, burned buildings, Ruth Adair's face. Marcus, 13 years old, looking into a camera and describing what he saw. life insurance policies on a woman who is supposed to die, browser searches in cold white text, and Colton's own voice, captured, clear, unmistakable, filling the room through every speaker. 400 faces turned toward the screens. Colton stood at the podium, mouth open, hands gripping the edges, and every camera in the room was already rolling. The first image was Ruth Adair, her church photograph, blue dress, warm smile, 60 years in Detroit. Beside it, her death certificate. Cause of death, smoke inhalation. Location, a Corktown property owned by a trust Senna had never signed. The second was the property trail. 11 buildings, 11 insurance claims, tens of millions collected. Every deed filed under Senna's forged signature, with forensic analysis proving she'd never touched the pen. The third was Marcus, 13 years old, looking directly into the camera, describing the men he saw through his bedroom window. The liquid against basement glass, the sound the fire made, the report he filed that vanished in 48 hours. The fourth was the insurance policies on Senna's life. $3 million. Shell Trust controlled by Colton. His browser history beside it. Searches mapping how to kill a woman and make it look like an accident. The audio played last. Colton's own voice filling every speaker in the hall. You're nothing, Senna. You exist because I let you. Walk out that door and I'll have you committed before you reach the sidewalk. 400 people heard it. Every camera captured it. Colton stood at the podium. The mask tried to reassemble. These documents are fabricated. His own voice cut him off. The audio looped. The threat played again. The mask collapsed. Alderman Tynes bolted for the side exit and walked directly into 2 FBI agents who'd been waiting since an anonymous package arrived at the Detroit field office that morning. Donors scattered. The police captain who'd golfed with Colton vanished into the crowd. Colleagues turned their backs with the speed of people who understood proximity had become career poison. FBI agents entered the main hall, calm, unhurried, inevitable. Colton saw them coming. His shoulders caved. He looked across the room at Senna, standing untouched, backlit by the screens displaying his destruction. And for the first time in their marriage, he had nothing to say. They cuffed him on the stage, at his own ceremony, in front of every camera that had come to celebrate him. Senna stood in the center of the hall. She didn't cry. She breathed, deep, full, unrestricted. Her ribs expanded without pain for the first time in longer than she could remember. 6 months later, the building on Michigan Avenue had been rebuilt from the bones out. A sign above the front door read, "The Ruth Adair Center," a free after-school tutoring and meal program for children in Detroit's underserved neighborhoods. Founded by Senna Murray, she ran it herself. She taught reading and math to kids who reminded her of the students Colton had taken from her. She memorized their birthdays. She kept extra snacks in her desk. The teacher he tried to erase was now the foundation of everything she built from his wreckage. Marcus was the first kid through the door on opening day. His mother cried in the entrance. Marcus didn't. He sat at a desk, opened a book, and looked at Senna with the quiet understanding of a boy who finally knew that telling the truth had been worth it. Colton was sentenced to 24 years. Arson, insurance fraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter, domestic battery, attempted murder. Tynes received 14. Ezrin walked into the center on a Tuesday afternoon. The tension that had lived in his shoulders was quieter. He'd stepped back from the port operations, handed the network to Rook. He was investing in legitimate development along the corridor, including transitional housing next door. Senna was hanging student artwork in the hallway when she saw him. She set down the tape and turned. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. That second night at the safe house, I woke up screaming. The nightmare. Colton standing over me, the door sealed shut. She paused. I threw my door open and you were sitting in a chair in the hallway. Not inside the room, outside. Book in your lap. You looked up and said, "Door's open. It stays open." and went back to reading. Her eyes were bright. You could have come in. Any other man would have made that moment about himself. But you understood that a door I controlled meant more than anything you could give me by crossing it. That's when I knew. Ezrin stepped forward. Senna closed the distance. The kiss was hers, her choice, her timing. Not because he saved her. Because he showed her she could save herself. Because the most powerful thing he ever gave her was a door she controlled, and the space to decide when to open it. A federal detention facility outside Detroit. Colton Fairgate on a thin mattress in a cell barely wider than his shoulders. A television behind plexiglass. The anchor's voice bright and steady. The Ruth Adair Center, founded by Senna Murray, today celebrated the enrollment of its 200th student, providing free tutoring and meals to children across Detroit's most underserved neighborhoods. Colton's hand found the remote. He pressed the button. The screen went dark. The cell went quiet. The kind that doesn't lift, doesn't soften, doesn't end. He sat in it, and he lived with it. Senna Murray was abandoned in a hospital bed at 3 a.m. No phone, no money, no name on any emergency line. She whispered, "There's no one," to a nurse in an empty room. She was wrong. The man beside her bed wasn't a saint. But he knew what it looked like when the world gave up on someone. Because the world gave up on his mother in a room just like that one. He couldn't save his mother, but he could pull up a chair. He could leave a door open. She walked through it. And what she built on the other side will stand long after every name in this story has been forgotten. If this one reached you, don't let it sit quiet. Drop a comment and tell us what you'd name your center. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being left behind isn't the end. It's the ground floor of something better. Subscribe, ring that bell, and be here when the next one drops. It's already burning. We'll see you there.